Well, let's go ahead and get started. I would like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is our first in a series of winter webinars that we're going to have about various things cycling. But since this is the beginning of the off season for most people, one of the things that we thought would be particularly appropriate at this point in time is talking about strength training for cyclists, because the coaches at Power Up think that that is a very important thing when it comes to preparing folks for the season. So in regards to the goals of your off-season strength training, these are really the primary goals. You're trying to correct strength and mobility and flexibility imbalances. Obviously, in cycling, the range of motion is very limited. So you develop muscle imbalances in other parts of your body because you're always in a crouched position, if you would. So it develops weaknesses in your torso, weaknesses in your core, weaknesses in your posterior musculature. And this is the time of year when you want to try and work on those weaknesses. If you're recovering from an injury, this is the time of year when you don't have to worry about races, when you don't really have to worry about what the next goal is, where you can really work on correcting those injuries, whether it's taking time off, whether it's doing PT, whatever it is. This is the time that you should really focus on that, so that when you begin your serious training for next season, that everything's nice and balanced, everything's healed up, and you're more durable. And a lot of people don't talk about durability, particularly when it comes to cycling, because it is not an impact sport like running is,
unless you're me,
or a contact sport like football or soccer or baseball or rugby or whatever. But that being said, it's still very important. There's a lot of cyclists can develop chronic use injuries. Obviously, if you're racing mass start races, the risk of crashing is always there. And the more balanced you are, the more fit you are, the better you can avoid chronic use injuries, and the faster you can come back from crashes in a lot of cases. And it also increases, the psychological side of cycling. Everybody likes to feel strong. I mean, it's a really good feeling. And after a good off season of weight training, you hop on the bike and it's like, man, I'm crushing this. And that's just starting the season. And that's a great state of mind to begin your season in. And then obviously, besides taking care of injuries and balances and making yourself more durable, you want to develop your cycling muscles. Because if I'm on a hip sled and I'm pushing, I start out my weight training program, the strength cycle of my weight training program, and I'm pushing I'm doing 10 reps of 450 pounds. And 6 weeks later, I'm doing 10 reps of 550 pounds. That's going to translate to the power you can apply to the pedals, and how long you can apply that power. So we being the coaches at Power Up, believe that resistance training is an integral part of any cyclist year-round training program. And we're lucky enough to have as one of our coaches, Ashley Weaver. Ashley has a BS in exercise physiology from the Western States University. She has an MS in human performance from Lindenwood. She's a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and she's also on one of the top crit teams in the country. She's a Cat 1 racer for LA Sweat women's team, and she just knows a lot. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Yeah, so as you can kind of see on the screen right now, I work as a sports performance coach / personal trainer / power up cycling coach. So I have a little bit in just different, kind of have a foot in all these like different little avenues, and so it's fun. So it keeps me on my toes. I get to work with a wide range of people, but as a cyclist, my passion is cycling. So yeah, so I've done stuff with like the assistant strength and conditioning coach at my undergrad university. So I worked with pretty much almost every single sports team the university had, except for men's basketball. I've been weightlifting for a number of years. I've been personal training for about 7. And yeah, kind of like I said, I've worked with numerous amount of people. I've even worked with cardiac rehab patients. So I feel like I have a good broad knowledge. So yeah, so we'll go ahead and change to the next slide. Oh yeah, so one, as a millennial, I do love my memes. So this PowerPoint is filled with a bunch of different memes that make me laugh, and maybe I'll make you laugh too. So what this webinar is, and the goal of it for today, is to give you insight on how to incorporate a strength training program into an already existing endurance program. This is kind of known as concurrent training. And it just means that you're doing both endurance or your sports training mixed with some sort of strength training routine. Now, what this webinar is not, it's not a detailed strength training program that everyone should follow. Everyone has their own things need to be individualized. And so, yeah, so I don't try to give this more of a general idea and not saying that this is how you need to do things through the whole entire year and from year to year.
Uh-oh.
There we go. So why strength training? So as an endurance athlete, it is kind of cool to see more and more literature and the research is coming out saying that we all need to do some sort of resistance training, strength training. And so, yeah, so number one, it increases lean muscle mass. So this just means that muscle or mass that we can actually use. So like our quads, our hamstrings, those types of things. So the fiber muscles become larger. They, you'll even start to see some sort of like fiber type transition. So let's say like type 1, which is our slow, steady state type of fiber, could even take on some characteristics of a fast twitch fiber, which is really great for performance if you're looking to race and do those types of things. Your muscular architecture will start to change. Enzyme utilization, and what I mean by enzyme utilization, using like carbohydrates and fats and just being more efficient at those. And then substrate concentration, so ATP, we all need ATP to do muscle contractions and creatine phosphate. So the concentrations of these chemicals within the body are just greater with strength training. On top of that, you'll have connective tissue adaptation. So think about your tendons, ligaments, your bone mineral density will be high. So kind of a little example is earlier this year, I crashed into a wall going almost 30 miles an hour. Thank God I did not break anything. And so this is one of the reasons I do strength train, is because evident, like in the sport of cycling, it's not necessarily if I'm going to crash, it's just when it's going to happen. No, whether it's a small crash, a big crash, we want to make sure our bodies can handle that. We can bounce back and recover quick from that. You'll see an increase in neural recruitment. So how quickly we're able to activate something, whether it's you're going for a sprint or you're turning, if you're on a group ride, you turn a corner, then all of a sudden there's a big hill. You got to be able to react to that stimulus, whatever is coming at you, to be able to be successful. Then you'll see some better hormone responses. So you'll see an increase in testosterone, growth hormone. So this is what your body naturally does, not synthetic. Some stuff like catecholamines, building up good muscles. You will actually see some increase in cardiorespiratory response, which is kind of cool. So think if you've just done a really hard set of exercises, and you'll probably start to feel like the heart rate increase, maybe a little bit out of breath. So you'll see some of those benefits. You will have an increase in power and rate of force development, which is really great for our max power when we go to do those sprints or going up a hill. And then the muscular increase in muscular strength and power. And then also with cycling, running, swimming, economy, pretty much anything that we do, it just makes us more efficient. This kind of ties into that neuromuscular side and being able to recruit things properly. And there's like a little graph if you want to get a little more into it. And ultimately, why do we do this? Why do we strength train? And it's to make us better athletes. We're all athletes. We're all wanting to perform better. And so kind of like what we're looking at this graph is you have athlete blue, who could be an advanced athlete. Sure, they're fast, sure, they're strong, but with strength training, we're wanting to be quicker and faster and equally strong. And so this is ultimately why we do this in a short, very brief description of that. So where do I start? One, if you have a coach, definitely need to talk to them. You need to be on the same page. If you don't have a coach, there's coaches. It's easy to look up. Also, a lot of stuff on the internet. Definitely be careful of like what you read, what you follow. And then outside of that, I really do encourage, if you're not familiar with strength training, or even if you have, but it's been a while, I definitely suggest hire a personal trainer or a strength coach, somebody who can have eyes on you to look at your form. And so ideally, this is going to be someone who's experienced in programming for athletes specifically. And this is because you're not going to train somebody who's just wanting to stay healthy the same way you're wanting to train someone who is working for performance. And then in particularly endurance athletes, it's a little different. So next, you'll need to do some sort of sports analysis. You want to look at what are key performance indicators within your sport, within your discipline of cycling. So this is stuff like looking at the movements, looking at the physiological analysis and injury analysis of the sport. You need to know kind of the ins and outs of that. And then the athlete assessment. So yourself, you need to evaluate what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are things that you need to work on. Is it body awareness? These are all things that we need to think about when we're creating a program for someone. And then training status. Are you beginner, intermediate? Are you untrained, or are you advanced? These are all also things you need to think about. And then note one, if you have pain or discomfort before you even start strength training with anything, definitely see a physical therapist before starting a weight training program. Also talk to your doctor. That's what they always tell us. So you should probably go do that too. And I will point out that if you are lifting or strength training, whatever you're doing, if you're experiencing pain, you should not be experiencing pain with any sort of exercise. So if you do, I do encourage you to either seek out a physical therapist, seek out a trainer, someone who can visually see what you're doing and maybe correct you and give you cues to help avoid pain. Because ultimately, if you're experiencing even just a little bit of pain, it could snowball and turn into something greater. So ultimately, just kind of like with anything, you want to have a plan before going into the off-season strength training program. You got to know kind of when your season's going to begin, just so you know what to focus on, how to build one cycle off of the other. So I'm not going to go too much into this. I will kind of go down to the bottom, talk about what type of equipment do you have access to. This could help decide on how your off-season strength training is going to be programmed. And then also, what are your physiological needs for your event? Is it going to be strength endurance, hypertrophy, max strength, strength to power, max power, or peaking or maintenance? Kind of what I talked about last slide, you got those key performance indicators of the sport. So for us, you have stuff like max speed, max power, 20-minute threshold test. You have a 5-minute test, a 1-minute test. So these are all things that we kind of need to think about when we're going to program for something. And also, don't confuse the body by throwing too many conflicting signals at it. So for example, it's like, we're not going to focus on like one little area of max strength and then go to throw all of this hypertrophy and then go back to power. Kind of pick a general theme and kind of stick with it for that training phase. And this kind of goes along with the previous slide with doing an annual training phase. I really like this graph. It's great. Basically, it just explains that if we give yourself a certain stimulus, so like say it's aerobic endurance, we focus on it for this cycle, whatever you got, the adaptations you got from that cycle, focusing on aerobic endurance, it should stay around the adaptations for about 30 days, plus or minus 5, give or take, if you're deciding to focus on another stimulus. So like say cycle aerobic endurance, then the next cycle, I start going to like strength endurance. That aerobic endurance, I don't necessarily have to touch that, give or take 30 days plus or minus 5. Now this is, you have to be training. You can't just say like, oh, I'm going to train all of this time to work on my endurance, and then all of a sudden I'm going to just take time off, and it's not going to stick around for 30 days. So this is while training. And it kind of just goes through all the different types of focuses for training.
And this, I'm going to interject something here. This graph is one way of representing the periodic training, in that, you know, the old idea of the pyramid, you know, the base of the pyramid being your endurance, and the broader you make that endurance, the higher the pyramid will go. And this kind of reinforces why that works and why that is scientifically sound. So it also sort of addresses I don't know if everybody has heard about the 80-20 rule. Well, whereas if you're an endurance athlete, you should spend 80% of your time doing endurance work and only 20% of your time doing speed work. And this kind of lends itself to that theory too. I agree with Ashley. This is a great graph.
And this just kind of shows, like, this is something that I use personally, where I can kind of mesh cycling training with strength training, so I can kind of get a broad picture of it. Unfortunately, Training Peaks doesn't do a great job on the strength training side. So this is a way that I can kind of put it out, overlap it together, and kind of look at the broader picture. So we'll start getting more talking into exercising and weightlifting. So first thing is exercise selection. So these are just a few considerations we think about. I kind of talked earlier about available equipment. Do we have just exercise bands, medicine balls, stability balls? Go into the whole thing. We can keep this list going on and on and on if we wanted to. So what's available to us? Some gyms have a lot of things. Some gyms don't have a lot of things. Some gyms have a lot of space. That's one thing that we sometimes forget, is how much space do we have? So always keep that in mind. How many days off per week / amount of time? So this is going to be dependent on the person and the person's schedule. We all have lives. We all have things outside of cycling and our sport and training. So that is always going to be a big indicator of how much time we're able to give. And then another thing is we're all cyclists. So that's going to take top priority over any strength training day. But ideally in the off season, shoot for about 2 to 3 days a week of full body workouts. We're all athletes. When we ride a bike, we incorporate all of our body. We incorporate the arms, the core, the legs, whether we're sprinting, climbing, just even riding into the wind. It all works together. So that's kind of how we should train. And then ideally in the season, 1 to 2 days a week, full body still. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to the gym. Personally, I go to the gym throughout the season, but I know that's not available to everyone. And then also with travel schedules and vacations, even getting like a band, like exercise bands, they could be great in-season resistance training program. And this is something that you could do easily at home before you get on the bike. You could do stuff like squats and upper body stuff and glute stuff, and it's really endless. And then also, what are your training goals? Are you trying to go and do 6-hour gravel races? Are you trying to do a crit race, track, triathlons? These are also things that we need to think about. So a little bit more into exercise selection. I kind of wanted to touch base on this. I haven't really done too much in the previous years on this, but I want to talk a little bit more about sport-specific movements. So you want to think about not necessarily early in the season, but once we're getting closer to our actual season starting, we kind of want to move towards more sport-specific movements. So what muscles are being activated and from which angles. And so we have a picture here of Woot climbing. And if this is, you're going to be climbing, maybe you want to work on mimicking, maybe not exactly like this, but doing something in the gym that mimics this position. Whether it's like the ankle and the foot. With cycling, you don't necessarily always press through the heel. So maybe once you get good form with everything and you're comfortable, maybe you slightly put a wedge under the heel and you transition the weight to the foot. These are all things, theories, things that we could play around with, have fun. And then on the flip side of that, you also want to incorporate some non-sport specific movement. So we're always so much like front and back, whereas we don't do too much side to side. So we always want to incorporate stuff like this, just to work on those muscles to make sure that we are nice and strong. So one example is, and I see this so much more than I wish I did, but if you look at a lot of pro races, and I've seen it in road races and cyclocross and crits, and you'll see a lot of people with knees caving in. Now, one, that could be bike form, but it also could just be some weak glute mediuses and posteriors and all sorts of things, tight abductors, weak IT bands. And so, yeah, so like doing some lateral movements, you don't have to do a lot, but maybe like once a week, you throw in like some sort of like side to side. And then we have a little diagram here that kind of breaks down the pedaling stroke and ideally what muscles are being activated the most when. And then, yeah, like cyclists have really weak posteriors. So for example, really good example in this picture, he's hunched over. Everything on the back is pretty elongated, where everything on the front is shortened. A lot of cyclists do have weak glutes, and especially if you work a full-time job sitting in a cubicle or sitting in a chair all day, that's just getting lengthened and stretched. So maybe you need to do a little bit more posterior work, hamstrings, glutes, rows, lat pull downs, stuff of that nature, just to make sure we are also functioning human beings. So yeah, so the next little bit more into exercise selection, you have like your main lifts, assistance exercises, and etc. So your main ones that we can think of off the top of your head, you have like squats, deadlifts, bench presses, overhead presses. You can go even further with like saying squat variations. You could sometimes have like a split squat or stuff like that as your main core lift, but that's just pretty much what your main focus and main objective is of that day. And these are really ones that just recruit one or more larger muscle groups, multiple joint exercises, and it ideally is going to have a direct application to sport. So stuff like squats and deadlifts, they have a really good correlation to cycling performance. There's a lot of studies out there with squats specifically that shows how much they can affect like your 5-minute and even sometimes your 20-minute. Some studies have shown. And then you have stuff kind of like your bicep curl, leg extension, calf raises, tricep, you name it. These are going to be like the smaller muscle groups, maybe generally only one muscle group, single joint exercises. And then I kind of want to throw this one in there too. You also have like plyometric exercises, and these are going to be more like your explosive jumps and stuff of that nature. Then we want to think about structural versus power exercises. Where are we at in our phase of training in the off season? And then generally you want to keep about 5 to 8 exercises in a workout. That will generally put you about an hour or so with a warm up and everything and cool down. Most people don't have time to spend 2 hours in the gym, so a good 5 to 8 is a good range. And then one thing you want to think about with every single exercise, it's a perfect time to get your core work in. And so, yeah, so you want to make sure you have a strong core for every single exercise that you have. And your core is basically anything connected to the torso. So like your shoulders, the posture, the back, the abs, the glutes, all of that is part of your core. So yeah, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. We could go on for days probably listing exercises, and I have a lot of fun exercises, and then I even forget about it. I'm like, oh, I forgot totally that exercise even existed. So I won't go too much into it, but here are some examples of some lovely exercises. And then even with each of these exercises, you could have thousands of variations and ways to change it up and make it more fun.
I think even though this is only a partial list, I think this is a just looking at this list, I think it speaks to why it's important to work with a trainer. Particularly if you look at a list like this, and and as Ashley just said, I mean, if you're doing the exercises correctly, and you're doing a good warm up and you're doing a good cool down, 5 or 8 exercises is all you're going to fit in an hour's time. And I think she's being generous with that hour. It could punch over an hour a little bit,
Yeah.
but that's why the selection of the exercise at the particular time or phase that you're in, at least to my way of thinking, is very, very important. Anyway.
And yeah, kind of talking about a little bit back to that 5 to 8 exercise. As endurance athletes, we all can become very obsessive and think about, oh, a little bit more should help. A little bit more won't hurt. And then you just keep adding and adding and adding. And I'll kind of go into this a little bit more. We don't always need more volume. We already get a ton of volume on the bike. We don't necessarily need to do a lot more volume in the gym. So yeah, so I'll move on off of that. So different ways of methods of resistance training, things that kind of go into the day-to-day workouts, and how to set them up ultimately. And each one of these will have a slide, so we'll just go each one.
Next slide.
Yeah. So yeah, so first we'll start off with repetition. So this is just the number of reps performed for a given exercise. So every time you complete one, that's 1 rep. Next one, 2, 3, 4, 5. I feel like most of us as athletes, that's a fairly simple thing to wrap our head around. So yeah, so the number of reps performed is based on the load. So it's going to be an inverse relationship. So higher the load, so heavier the weight, the lower number of reps. The lower the load, the higher number of reps. And the number of reps can be, the number of reps performed can result in specific adaptations. So if we look at the graph down here, we truly want to focus on the yellow. So like a lot of sciences, nothing is ever black or white. There's a lot of gray. So just because we're focusing on power doesn't necessarily mean we're not getting some of the other adaptations. It's just that's the main focus of what we're doing. So yeah, so ideally it was start at the top, so strength. Ideally anything below 6 reps. This is gonna be like your truly like really heavy weight. You're probably not gonna be moving that fast. Yeah. Next one below, we have power. This is really going to be anything below 5-ish reps or so. The weight itself won't be as heavy as your strength, but you're going to be moving quicker, more explosive movements. These are going to be taxing on the body in a different way, just because you are moving so much faster than you would with strength. Next, you have hypertrophy, which is probably what most of us are familiar with. It's anywhere from that 6, it can be anywhere from 6 to up to that 12 rep range. This is a good area for one foundation, building a great foundation for which you layer on like that strength and power, those adaptations. 2, you'll build more muscle, you'll put on more muscle in this. So it's good for building that base and having that muscle there, but you don't want to spend too much time here because as cyclists, we don't need to be these big bodybuilders on bikes. We're not CrossFit. And then lastly, we have muscular endurance. Pretty much anything above 12 or 13 reps, you're going to hit that muscular endurance. Kind of what I touched on earlier. We're cyclists, we're already endurance athletes. We don't need more endurance tacked on to that. That's just going to destroy our nervous system and fatigue us. Okay, so how many sets? So this depends on one, if you're a beginner versus an advanced athlete in the weight room, what training phase you're in. So we have dumbbell door right there on the side of the screen. So training goal. I'll just kind of go down the list. So we have strength. That's that anything below 6 are heavy weights. You're looking anywhere from 2 to 6 sets of this. Then we go down. We have our power. So we have our single effort. This is going to be like a heavy explosive movement, anywhere from 1 to 2 reps. And then it can be anywhere from 3 to 5 sets. If we're doing multiple effort, so it's like a 3 to 5 rep range, so maybe a little less weight than that single effort, but you're still doing like 3 to 5 sets. That doesn't really change. Hypertrophy, like I said, 6 to 12. This can be anywhere from, and ultimately, so this, I got this from the NSCA textbook. There's sometimes I'll do like 2 sets, especially if you are if you are new into it. Sometimes even just doing body weight squats. 2 sets of 10 body weight squats can make you sore if you're not used to it. So they say 3 to 6, it can be anywhere 2 to 6. As endurance athletes and cyclists, I wouldn't say put 6 sets of 12 reps. I think that would just be too much hypertrophy for us, and not needed. And then so muscular endurance, you have anything over 12, be 2 to 3 sets of that. So volume load. So this is ultimately sets times reps times load. So that's the weight being lifted. So kind of what I touched on earlier, endurance athletes, high volumes can increase endurance, but if we have too much of one stimulus, you're going to overload the nervous system and you're going to plateau, and you could potentially do burnout, overuse injury. I could probably go on and on about this. And so, yeah, so volume load, sets, reps, loads, kind of go down. So when do we know when to increase the weight? We have, or actually, let me jump down to the graph before I go to the 2 for 2 rule. So this is an example of how different sets with different reps of a 1 RM. So this is calculated for a 1 RM for 225 back squat. So this person is very strong. So we'll start down at the bottom. Say you have an endurance phase, just 1 set of 30 at 25% of that 225 back squat is 45 pounds times 30. You only get 1,350 kgs being lifted. Or this should be pounds, not kilograms. Then we have back squat, still in that endurance phase. 2 times 15 with 50% at 120 or 112.5 still equals 30 reps, 3,375. You see it next for the 3 times 10. And then even like with the 4 times 8, we are getting 2 extra reps, but we are giving that athlete a greater stimulus with a greater rest. And this could help them reach their adaptations faster. And we're hitting different focuses. So it just kind of shows you how the volume load can be used to track. Kind of similar to with cyclists, we use like that TSS as an indicator to figure out how hard we're going and whatnot. This is a way that we can kind of track that number. And then we have the 2 for 2 rule. How do I know when to increase the weight? This is a really good conservative rule to follow. So if an athlete can perform 2+ reps over the assigned rep goal in the last set in 2 consecutive workouts with good form, then you can do it. So for example, say I back squat today, I say I was prescribed sets of 8. By the last exercise, I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good at this. I am able to do at least 2 more reps. before calling it quits that day. And then say next Monday, I come back and do it again. And I'm like, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. Let me do it 2 more reps. Then you can increase. And ideally for lower body, you can increase at greater rates. And by greater rates, I'm talking about like maybe 10 to 15. You don't want to do crazy increases, but like maybe 10 to 15 pounds increase, whereas upper body, maybe like 5 to 10 pound, like smaller increments, and just because we're dealing with smaller muscles. We can go to the next one. Oh, there we go. So intensity. So load to rep relationship. Kind of talked about this a little earlier. This is determined on percentages based typically on like a 1 RM, 3 RM, 5 RM, or even a 10 RM. There are, and then also one, you really need to go to failure. There are some times where it might be in your training plan. Sometimes I have people will throw them up on a pull-up and I want to see how many reps they can do until they just can't do anymore. But this is not every single time. So if you look at this graph, you can see like, say, giving a certain number of reps. Ideally, this is correlated to a certain number of 1 RM. I will highly suggest you want to leave about 1 to 2 reps left in the tank. And what I mean by this kind of goes into that you don't need to go to failure. You want to feel like you can still do 1 to 2 quality reps, especially if you're lifting heavy. If we're a little lighter, maybe 3 to 4 reps short of going to failure. So this is a really good graph I like to have. There's actually some research that's coming out that I've started seeing that and it doesn't necessarily, we could even be focusing on like that strength phase of lifting. And if you're still trying to go to failure, you'll be increasing your basically adding more muscle mass than you may intend to. So kind of like I said, we don't want to spend too much time in the hypertrophy phase. We want to spend more time in that like strength or power, just because we are athletes. We don't need to add more muscle to our bodies.
Ashley, I'm going to interject something here. Don't you, in your experience, do you find if people do go to failure, their form tends to deteriorate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's just putting you at greater risk of injury.
So that's another reason to not do it.
So yeah, so load and rep assignment based on training goal. I'm not going to go too much into this. We can all see the chart. So strength, anything above 85% of that 1 RM. It could even be a predicted 1 RM. You don't necessarily have to go out and try to find 1 RM for back squat or deadlift. For power, depending on if you're doing a single effort, multi-effort, a single effort, you're going to have a higher percentage. With this multiple effort, you're going to have a lower percentage. Hypertrophy, 67 to 85%. And then muscular endurance is going to be anything below 67% of that 1 RM. And then the goal repetitions. And then we have our rest periods based on the training goal. And this is the rest periods will allow you to reach the adaptations that you're trying to do. So kind of similar to why we give rest weeks in the broader scope of training. It allows the body to rest and make the adaptations that it needs. With having the rest in between the sets, it allows the body to make those adaptations, maybe not at a greater scale, but it's all these like little tiny ones. So training goal, we have for strength exercises. So these are our really heavy, really hard thing. You're trying to do 4 times 5 back squat at a really heavy weight with keeping good form. 2 to 5 minutes is what the book says. I would say you could probably even go up to 6 minutes depending on how heavy you go. Same with the power. There might be days like, say you didn't get great sleep that night, or whatever happens, maybe you're stressed out, give yourself a little bit more rest periods between, just so that you can go into the exercise fully rested and recovered to keep proper form. Hypertrophy, it can be anywhere from 30 seconds to 90 seconds, and then muscular endurance, you don't really need too much rest periods between each of the bouts, so anything below 30 seconds. Exercise order. So this is the sequence of resistance.
Ashley, can I, before we leave this, can you talk a little bit about speed of movement for each of these different phases?
I think I might be talking about that later on.
Okay.
Maybe. If not, remind me and we can go back.
Okay.
So yeah, exercise order, the sequence of resistance exercises during the workout. This is based on how one exercise can affect the quality of the effort or the technique of another exercise. So first, you must know your exercises of that day. Are we going to be doing some supersets, compound sets? So supersets are when opposing muscle groups of the same, trying to like the best, forgetting the exact definition, but for example, is like a chest press to a row, or a deadlift to lunges type of thing. So you're working different muscle groups, but opposite. So you have like, may have like a push or pull exercise. So for a bench press, you're pushing, for a row, you're pulling. So it's still upper body. Compound sets are where you do like a lower body, an upper body, and a core. Compound sets are very convenient, especially if you're crunched. You can let the lower body rest while you're doing the upper body, and then you can let those rest sometimes while you're doing the core. And then usually by the time you get back to, or after you finish the core, you may have to rest maybe a minute before you go back into it. It's gonna be different depending how quickly you move through. But it could be more time efficient for you if that's what you're looking for. You always want to do your big, powerful movements first. You want to work your way from big to small, complicated to simple. So I may not necessarily have like a deadlift at the very end of the exercise or of the workout, just because you're going to put yourself more risk of injuring yourself. Things are already going to be taxed. You're especially around like the core. Especially with the deadlift, you don't want your lower back muscles to already be fatigued when you're trying to go do heavy deadlifts. And so this just makes it a much safer environment for the athlete. So we have loading patterns. There's so many different ways to do this. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but we can have loading patterns for individual exercises. So for example, we have deadlift. We have the same amount of reps for every single one, but we have a change in load. So we work from 82.5% of that 1 RM, work it up. Each time we're increasing a weight a little bit. This is one way. We can reverse that. There's so many different variations of this. I could probably talk about it all night. Or we have a loading pattern for the whole training week or block. So this could be some people, there's been some controversy. Each coach does it different. We have linear versus undulating periodization. Linear just means same volume and intensity throughout the week, may slightly increase throughout the training block. So say week 1, we lift at 82.5%. Week 2, every day we lift at 85%. Week 3, we may lift at 87.5. Whereas that undulating is going to be depending on the day and the volume and intensity throughout the week. And this might be more suitable for an athlete, potentially, who knows? So day 1, it could be that moderate intensity. So it could be like that 85%. Day 2 could be that high intensity, quality focus, lower volume. You're not going to be doing that many reps. And that could be that 87.5 rep or percentage. And then day 3, going into the weekend, maybe you're resting. You could be that higher volume, lower intensity. So we could do that 82.5, or you could view that as kind of like a little rest. I say a little rest. You're still lifting 82.5% of 1 RM, but you can look at it as a slightly easier day. So now we're going to kind of talk about warm up, cool down. I've heard a lot of people saying that they don't have time for a warm up, or they don't have time to cool down after. If you have time to work out, you have time to properly warm up and cool down. Otherwise, you're just going to set yourself up for failure. So for a proper warm up, ultimately, generally, you can make this somewhat as short as you want, sometimes a little longer if you want. I like to have a longer warm up. It helps me get my mind in the right place. You can ask John, he always laughs about how long it takes me to warm up. And so ideally you want to move from general to more specific. So you can spend anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10 minutes of a slow aerobic activity. You could do the row machine, jogging, the elliptical, cycling on the spin bike, even maybe the Stairmaster if you like that kind of thing. From there, you can move into more like of a mobility dynamic movement, working on muscle activations. And this is really going to be priming the body. So for example, for some mobility exercises, you have thoracic rotations. A lot of cyclists don't have good thoracic mobility. So that's always really good to incorporate. Kind of what I talked about earlier, you kind of want to know the weaknesses of the sport and kind of see if there's ways we can integrate that into our warm up or muscle activations. It's a really easy way. We have scorpions, cat cows, bodyweight squats, whatever, you name it. You can move into more of like muscle activations. These could be glute bridges, clamshells, prone snow angels, stuff with bands, lateral walks, monster walks. The list can go on with that. And then from there, and then also, what are your specific problem areas? And then you can move into more dynamic movement, lunges, over unders, walking with a twist, bodyweight squats. I've actually started doing with myself and some of my athletes, putting in some jumps, like some skips, and kind of starting to prime the body so that when later down the road, when we do get some plyometrics, it's not necessarily a shock to the body. So these could be very simple, like skips, maybe some light body weight jumps, kind of starts priming the body, but you're not killing the body. And then maybe you move more into a specific warm up, something that mimics the core lift. So for example, say you're doing back squat that day, you do 5 reps, start at the bar, kind of slowly progress the weight up to your starting weight. So you say you start with the bar, then the next time you do 65% of whatever you're going to be lifting that day, 75, 85, and then you should be good to go by the time you reach your weight. And then cool down. You can incorporate like a light aerobic activity. You could do a light walk or bike ride. Say you live close to the gym, you could walk or bike home. And then you could do some sort of like full body static stretching, holding at the in position, 15 to 30 seconds. Focus on having good posture throughout the stretches. Remember to breathe. You could do some foam rolling, the Theragun, the Normatex, you name it. Ultimately, whatever you enjoy, throw that in. And then some food for thought. Kind of talked about this earlier. You always like think about your training age of the athlete, what we're going to be throwing at them. I'm not going to throw somebody coming into the gym an Olympic lift or a very technical exercise that's just going to set them up for failure. You want to be present during the workouts. And one thing I've started focusing more with my athletes is moving with intent. As an athletes, we want to be fast. Faster makes you better. Faster at the end of the race, generally the fastest person wins. And so you want to think about when you're lifting. One, yes, you want to be controlled with the exercise. So like say for a squat, you want to have good form, but you also want to, and especially in a coming out of the bottom of the squat, you want to think about you're coming out quickly, moving fast, but moving with intent. And by that, I mean making sure you're engaging all the muscles that you need to, you're doing proper activations. If you get through a round of exercises and somebody asks you, oh, where did you feel that? And you're like, oh, I don't know. Then you probably weren't moving with intent. And I hear that more often than not. So think about what you're doing, how you're moving, how quickly you're moving. And kind of the next bullet, to be fast, you got to move fast. And this is kind of where we start to see that neuromuscular side of things, that reaction time. When we move fast, we start to create better and more neuromuscular junctions. So like the brain talking to the muscle becomes better. And then we also kind of want to think about workout interference. By this, with being endurance athletes, cycling is our sport. Weightlifting is not our sport. So we want to think about workout timing. During certain times of the year, maybe your strength training is going to come before your cycling. Maybe it's going to be the opposite way. How much time, if you're going to do same day workouts, how much time is in between? Because we want to give your body rest. If you do things with not enough rest between, you're probably going to set yourself up for failure. So these are all things that working with a coach and a trainer can kind of help you work through, because there are so many ways of doing this that can be a little overwhelming. This just kind of goes through what we kind of talked about. We don't have to spend too much time on this. We can go to the next slide. So just a few safety tips. I'm huge on safety, because if we're not going to be safe, why be here? So remember, technique is key. Technique is the biggest thing. Some things, maybe you use this, maybe you don't. Weightlifting belts, I would say try to stay clear of that if possible, just because kind of like if you've ever like sprained your wrist or sprained your ankle, when you wear some sort of brace, it begins to weaken things surrounding where you're wearing the brace with. So with a weightlifting belt, you don't have to, you can kind of get sloppy with not bracing your core and keeping the core nice and strong. So if you need a weightlifting belt to perform a certain weight and exercise, unless you're maxing out, which we probably won't be doing much of, you probably shouldn't be lifting at that weight, because that just means you have an underdeveloped core to be able to work at that weight. So maybe your legs are strong, but other areas are lacking in that. And so maybe you should back the weight off and focus on making sure you can keep everything engaged properly before going to that weight. We have safety bars, just different types of barbells. Then you have barbell lock collar. So these are just things that go on the edge of the bar and make sure the weight stays put. Footwear, I would really say do not lift in running shoes. 1 second, my laptop's about to die. So with footwear, ideally you want a solid sole shoe. Some people even do some barefoot lifting. Depending on how comfortable you are, sure, maybe. I would say just watch out for your toes. And then with running shoes, they have a high sole in the back, which could give some way of like letting your ankle roll in, letting it roll out. So this just keeps everything nice and safe. You want to make sure you breathe through the exercise. We are not power lifters, so we don't need to be holding our breath. So make sure you exhale through the sticking point. We have proper hand grips, stable body and limb positioning, feet position during standing exercises. We want to make sure our feet are planted. If we're ever like on our back or seated, we want to make sure we have a good 5 point of contact. Feet are on the ground, hips are in the seat, shoulders are back on the bench. Working on range of motion, making sure we go through a full range of motion. And at the end of the day, risk versus reward. So kind of want to talk a little bit of the programs we have to offer. So a few different ways of doing this. With Power Up, we can do kind of like a bundle of where we can do like Nutriformance training plus Power Up performance training. Or whatever, kind of pick what works for you. So option one, we have it's $55 a month for 4 months. So this is just a 4-week strength training routine delivered through, if any of you guys are familiar with Team Builder, it's a strength conditioning app that has your workouts in, videos, you can talk to the coach, communication, and with 2 in-person or virtual group training sessions each cycle. And this just is to ensure you know what you're going to be doing, you know the exercises, you know what muscles need to be worked, what the main goal is of that cycle, making sure you're progressing the loads appropriately. And so that's where that second training session is. And then, like I said, communication will be available. And then ideally we'll test like the right and left leg strength on a force plate to be able to track progression throughout the 4 months, which is kind of cool. I got to play around with it a couple of weeks ago, so I really enjoyed that. And then option 2, we have $99 a month, and this is just option 1 plus full gym membership. And then if there are ever any like team or groups that are interested in like a semi-private session, reach out to me. We can always set something up. And this would be, say you have a team of riders who want to work out together. This would be a little more individualized, where you could meet like weekly or however many times a week, and work out as a group with a coach.
And just a little plug here. This is actually the first year we've ever set up a program like this with Nutriformance, and I guess I personally, I can't overemphasize the importance of, if you're going to do a strength training program, if that's going to be part of your off-season training, making sure that you're executing the exercises correctly is not only important from an injury prevention standpoint, but it's also important for getting the maximum benefits out of the exercises themselves. So that during the movement, you're actually engaging the muscles that you're trying to target. Because if your form is bad, you may, in fact, on any given exercise, not be engaging the muscles you're trying to strengthen. Ashley and I actually don't know if any of the other trainers at Nutriformance are going to be involved in this, but they're pros. They know what they're doing. They'll correct poor form and make sure that you get the most out of your off-season strength training program.
Yeah, so there is one person, another coach who I think may be helping me a little bit, depending the need and how many people. And the nice thing is with all of us at Nutriformance is that they do a good job of making sure that we know what we're talking about. We have our C.S.C.S, which is the gold standard of like strength and conditioning, and especially working with athletes. Like I said earlier, it's not going to be the same as just your normal personal training session that you can go to any gym and get. So the other coach that could potentially be helping out depending the need, he's a runner, and he's a collegiate runner, works with multiple athlete groups, really cool guy. He got his master's at Lindenwood as well. And then kind of like what the slide before, that single leg strength test, it actually does watts. So that's how it calculates how many watts you're expressing to the force plate. So on the screen to this leg press, you can see, or it's technically called a plyo press, but we can use a leg press. You can even jump on this, which is kind of cool. You have the force plate, which is mounted to the plate there. You'll do a single leg test. You hold this for, I want to say, I forget how long, like 15 seconds. You're just trying to press as hard as you can into it. And so you do one side and then go and do the other side. And there's other things we could test too, as well, but I feel like this one specifically is great for cyclists. And we can see how that tracks over the course. For me, I definitely had an imbalance, which is kind of cool to see. And so it'll be fun to see how that progresses throughout the off season and to see if we can get that the deficiency, if that we can decrease that and make it more equal. Yeah, so this is some of the resources, articles. Any questions?
I had a question. So I race cyclocross. So I just started my season. So when is a good time to like start incorporating like heavier strength training into my routine?
Yeah, I would say definitely don't do it in season. Never start something new in season. I would say definitely after you get done with your last race, give yourself a couple weeks to kind of regroup, have fun, enjoy yourself. And then after that, maybe a couple weeks to a month, depending on how your season went and how exhausted you feel after it. I would say slowly start adding it in anywhere. And it could even be just like starting off with like body weight squats, just to kind of get back into the swing of things. And then from there, slowly start increasing that. But I would say roughly about a month or so. Every person's different schedules and all of that, but that's a good general rule of thumb.
Great, thanks.
Absolutely.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to thank everybody for signing on tonight. The slide presentation will be posted on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions or want to learn more about the program at Nutriformance, you can send us an email at stltraining@powerupcycling.net or give us a call at 636-875-4334. Okay. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope everybody has a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.